and welcome to Whether or Not with Pilot Bob. Hey, Bob, what motivated you to start this podcast?
I wanted to shorten the go, no go decision making process for pilots. And I wanted to be able to throw in a couple of flying stories that inform and also should be fun.
So, what makes you qualified?
I've had over 50 years of flying experience in North and South America, including Alaska, Sub Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, the West Indies, quite a few places. And I've learned a lot.
So, the FAA gives extensive weather briefings and information. What can you add on top of that?
I want to focus on what's important on any given day, what to be aware of, and how to streamline that go, no go decision making.
So, can you give me an example?
Sure. In general, the pilot needs to know when a flight may encounter humidity changing states. That's the key point that I think I can bring to a weather briefing, which isn't covered specifically by the FAA. We all know humidity, and what is that? It's a gas. It's invisible moisture that's always in the air. That humidity, as the air cools, condensates, and it becomes something we call a cloud. Well, it continues to cool. It becomes something we call water, the form of rain. And as the cooling continues, it may become ice, which is a solid. Every time water changes state, it releases energy in the atmosphere, and being aware of where those releases of energy are taking place is a key thing for pilots to understand.
Aha. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. How long before departure does a pilot need to get a weather briefing?
Pilots always need to get two weather briefings. The first weather briefing should be 24 to 48 hours prior to your departure. You want to look for the big picture. Where are the fronts? How are things generally moving? Is there any dangerous weather out there? And then you want to look at the route to your destination, of course, and you also want to look for what I call a solid gold alternate, where you know you'll have clear skies and winds that makes a landing easy.
Okay, and what about that second weather briefing?
The second weather briefing will tell you whether the weather forecasters were right on their prediction that you got in the first briefing. If they're right, then you can pretty much rely on the forecast they're giving you. If they weren't right, then you know that whatever is happening is kind of got the weather prediction up for grabs, and you'll have to be much more careful in your analysis.
So tell me more about what you do with that information in the second weather briefing.
Well, first of all, you revisit your escape routes. Can you still pick what I call a solid gold alternate airport with clear skies and low winds? Next is if you're planning on returning in a couple of days, say your flight is to go to your cabin for a 3-day weekend, then consider your second outbound briefing as your first return home briefing. After the area forecast, check the winds at your departure and destination or within your own personal minimums. Get the temperatures and dew points for locations. Get the recorded weather stations that will give you the temperature and dew points for locations that are about every 30 minutes along your route of flight, and write down those frequencies. That gives you an opportunity to constantly update yourself on the weather during your flight. And it's very easy to do. Those briefings will give you cloud bases, cloud tops, and sky coverage, whether it's clear, partly sunny, partly cloudy, mostly cloudy, overcast, etc. So you can really keep a close eye on what's happening beneath you after you pick the quote ideal altitude for your flight.
So, how do you pick that ideal altitude for your flight?
Well, your second weather briefing tells you the temperature on the ground and the dew point where the humidity will condense into a cloud. It'll give you the cloud bases and the cloud tops. And we know that on average, the air cools 3 degrees centigrade with each 1,000 feet of increased altitude. Now, weather balloons take temperatures at all different flight levels, and you can request those temperatures from various flight levels and convert that to see if the 3 degrees centigrade cooling rule of thumb is valid on your flight. But with that information, you'll know that cloud bases are going to be at 3,000 feet above the ground. Maybe tops are going to be 5,000 feet above the ground. So you could pick an altitude of 6,000 feet and it'll be smooth air because it's above the clouds and it's above where the condensation is taking place and all that energy release I spoke of has already happened. So you'll be above the clouds and it'll be cool and smooth. It's important in most small planes. The air conditioning is you open a little vent. It's nice if the outside air temperature is 60 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit to keep the pilot calm and happy and the passengers.
So, earlier you had spoken about an escape route. Can you talk about that?
Sure, you check the major weather systems and the forecast, and you look for an airport that isn't going to be too far out of your way, but an airport that's going to avoid the major weather fronts, and it's going to be clear skies and low winds.
Can you talk more about the risk of getting trapped and how to avoid it? Trapped above clouds?
Yes, that's why you record the frequencies of the constantly broadcast weather information at each point about 30 minutes along your route of flight. So you're constantly listening to these recorded weather stations, and they'll tell you the cloud cover. Is it clear at that station? Is it partly cloudy, partly sunny, mostly cloudy, or overcast? And if you find that the ceilings are becoming more and more dense, and that tells you that you better descend sometime sooner rather than later while you still have openings in the clouds so you can make a VFR descent into your destination airport. Or alternately, if you find that you missed that and the clouds have become an overcast, then you'll have to go to your alternate.
So, you mentioned you had some stories when people don't do this quite right.
Well, they can get trapped over the overcast, which of course is an undercast then for you in your plane. And they'll do one of those things I said, either go back, retrace your steps to where there's openings in the sky and you get under the cloud, or just head for your alternate. But I find it very interesting to talk about folk wisdom. While flying in Alaska, the Alaskan bush pilots have a phrase, and they say, fly IFR, die IFR. Bur- Buried 3 days later in good weather. What that capsulizes is that if you want to fly in instrument flight conditions in Alaska, you have to stay above what's called the MEA, the minimum en route altitude. And what that does is give you clearance of 1 or 2,000 feet, depending on the terrain in the area, above the mountaintops. Well, if you're flying in clouds, you're in visible moisture, you're 2,000 feet above the mountaintops, means you're at 10,000 feet or higher, which means the outside air temperatures are below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'll be in icing condition. So if you get in clouds and you have to stay above that MEA and you're getting ice forming on your wings, that degrades the efficiency of the airfoil, and you constantly need more power to maintain altitude. Well, eventually you run out of power, you start going down. And that's where the phrase comes from, fly IFR, die IFR, buried 3 days later in good weather. And that simple sentence or two takes into account a whole lot of meteorology and a whole lot of physics.
All right, important information. Is there anything else to say about this?
Well, pilots should just remember to keep a close watch on where humidity is changing state. We've talked about that somewhat in more advanced weather chats. We can go into it more, but that's where you get thunderstorms. It's how you get tornadoes. It's how you get all kinds of unfortunate flying experiences. And so keep that thought in mind. Watch where moisture is changed state.
Excellent tip. Well, thank you, Pilot Bob, and we can't wait for our next lesson. Thanks for joining us on Whether or Not. Bye.
Bye bye.